Our next panel, A Free Iran, Aligning America's Values and Interests, will argue why regime change in Iran benefits the United States. Joining us are Navid Mohebbi, an Iran analyst, Ellie Cohanim, former U.S. Deputy Envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Walid Phares, author and scholar, and Michael Rubin, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Moderating is Tymahz, Nufti Policy Analyst.
Hello, how are all of you? I just want to say it's an absolute honor to be up here to moderate this distinguished panel. We're trying to keep it relatively conversational on this panel, so just keep that in mind. As Iranian Americans, this issue is inherently important to us, the alignment of the welfare of our two nations. But to understand the alignment of the interests of the United States and the interests of the Iranian people, we must understand our foe's common strategy. What is at the center of the regime's mutual strategy against the Iranian people and the United States? You can go ahead and start us off, Walid.
One, two. Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I would like to thank Nufti's leadership for this invitation and say hello to all my friends, including on the panel. My 2 minutes or less are going to be about a very general description of what I believe is a strategic control by the Islamic regime in Iran, some would call it the Iranian regime, of our own strategies regarding that republic. Seems a little bit complicated, but here's the story. I have followed and analyzed the issue with the regime since February 11, 1979. I was a teenager. So I went through all these decades during the Cold War, after the Cold War, after 9/11, after Iraq and Afghanistan, and of course after the Arab Spring, all the way till now. So my proposition is not about specifics. I could do this in the discussion. It's about it's at a historian level, if we want to say that. And my conclusion is that the regime is now winning over the decades. But they are winning because we are not winning. It makes it very oversimplified. We can win as a United States and international coalition. We have all the means. But the regime is winning because we are not taking the appropriate actions. We don't have the appropriate strategies to win that confrontation. The regime is not just in Iran, as we all know. It's Iraq, it's Syria, it's Lebanon, it's Yemen, and it's in the United States. The battle is happening mostly here. And one of the defaults, or one of the faults that we have as the United States is basically we are not able to read the strategic movements by what I call the Khomeinist in general terms. That's the most accurate, in my view, description of the regime. There are a lot of questions among our public and within the media and even within the intelligence community. I spent 15 years engaging with many agencies here, so I followed thoroughly what we call the Iran dossier. Most recently, since I do media a lot, we got all these questions from the anchors. What's happening in Yemen? They calculate, I was told, that Libya was done in 36 days. Saddam was done in 32 days. And on and on. Who are these Houthis that we cannot defeat if they are actually choking each other, closing the valve in the Red Sea, threatening international community? And on and on. Why are we not allowing Israel to finish the job with Hamas? Why are we not arming the Kurds as it should be to confront the militias coming from the regime? So all these questions seems to me that there is a lack of understanding of how the other camp is operating. And the problem, I don't think, is in the intelligence community. There are a lot of problems in the intelligence community, but they have all the capabilities that we don't have. They get the raw information. It's about policy. It's about the upper level, meaning the administration, not allowing these powerful arms, the powerful arms of the US government and of our allies. And here's the core of it. In my assessment, there is a force that emanated from the Islamic Republic years ago that has been able to lend here in the United States that is blocking any strategic, serious action to trigger a change. We're not, they even impose the narrative. Oh, regime change, you cannot do regime change, and if it's not regime change, there's war, and we are against war, and then you have the whole peace movement, so on and so forth. They have been able to control several levels that paralyzes us on the inside. And everybody on the panels yesterday, we went to see this senator, we went to see this lawmaker or decision maker, and they seem not to be either not having a strategy or not willing to apply a strategy. Something is blocking us in America. Something is blocking the Iranian American and Middle Eastern American communities from getting to that spot. I mean, we are 45 years after the emergence of that regime. I call the problem, including in my latest book, the transaction. There is a transaction. We are all aware of it. We never ask really the questions, what is this transaction doing? 2015, actually 14, there were those negotiations between the Obama administration and our partners in Europe, China, Russia, and the regime. What was the most important point in that transaction or in that negotiation? Yes, we know the papers, we know the stipulations, so on and so forth. We've been playing up and down. It's the $150 billion. $150 billion that traveled either directly or in tranche to that regime. And when I'm making the statement I'm making, a third grader will figure this out. How are they spending? How did they spend the $150 billion? That's the core of the issue. Well, you don't need a political scientist to figure out. They spent it against us. First, they didn't irrigate their own economy. That's why we have panels here figuring out the economy of the future. Second, they spent it on oppressing the Iranian people, on feeding the militias around the region, and here's the most important weapon they had. It's not the drones, it's not the missiles. Some of the military experts here said these are the worst, they shot against Israel, failed. It doesn't matter. The real drones are here. They used billions of dollars to actually expand and influence in the West. What is protecting them is not their weapons. What is protecting them is that shield. The Israelis call it the Israeli dome. They have a dome here. And many among you and on these panels have, in segments, tried to investigate how this influence operates. It operates at all levels of government since 2015, interrupted for 4 years under the Trump administration, but not very successfully, because it was part also of the opposition against him in foreign policy. We tried everything we could to help the Iranians, the Iranian people, during even the Trump administration. There was an opposition from the bureaucracy. So where are these forces? First is academia. If you control the classroom is going to produce the newsroom. The newsroom will produce the art room, California's, Los Angeles, so on and so forth. So basically, that force that was deployed here is disqualifying us, is disabling us from taking the right decisions, strategic decisions. That's why we have those questions about today's politics. And let me conclude by saying, many among us ask, are they making mistakes? Is the administration making mistakes, or these decision makers are making mistakes? No. This is the policy. It's not they don't know how to do it. This is the policy. It's to protect the force they are sending those billions to, and I will invite you to think about it. When you send that amount of money, there is a money coming back, and that money coming back is influencing the decisions or no decisions or wrong decisions of our decision makers, and I can expand later. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Walid. Our next question is going to be for Navid. Under the Islamic Republic, Iran has been designated a state sponsor of terrorism, supporting groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. How would regime change in Iran impact the global fight against terrorism, and what benefits would it bring to both U.S. national security?
Thank you, Tymahz. First of all, I would like to thank Mufti's leadership for for organizing this amazing two-day conference. And as someone who has been here for the past 2 years, I think this third year is a huge progress from the past 2 years. So congratulations, Dr. Ganji and Mr. Razvan. To answer your question, Tymahz, I think it's pretty clear that the threats from the Islamic Republic regime is not hidden from anyone anymore. Iran's nuclear program, terrorism in the region, expansionism, they're all old news, and many of panelists over the past 2 days talked about that. But I think the problem is that over the past 10 years, 15 years, these issues are just getting bigger and more dangerous. No one could have imagined like 10 years ago that Iranian regime, Islamic Republic alongside Russia would become a huge problem for the integrity of election in the United States. Even worse, when you open TV and you watch news outlets, you are hearing every other day that the Iranian regime is plotting another assassination against former government officials or US candidates. So I think the real problem and what concerns me the most is our inaction and the fact that we have allowed this to happen and we're not doing anything about it. So I would say that this is a national security threat and it's an internal threat. We are not taking the Islamic Republic regime threat seriously, and the issues are just getting bigger and bigger. I want to ask you this question. Do you remember if we had ever had any issues, for example, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, Iranian regime attempting to meddle in the US election? It's a new phenomenon. How about going after Iranian dissidents on US soil? Last time a terrorist group in 2001 attempted to successfully kill Americans. It didn't end up well. So why we are not acting against the Iranian regime? Iranian regime in nature, the Islamic Republic, is an expansionist force. They do not believe in the idea of a nation state. Khamenei just last week gave a speech stressing that he believes in and he's fully committed to the idea of Islamic Ummah, Ummat Islami, believing that all Islamic nations and Muslim countries should come under his control or the influence of the Iranian regime, or becoming another proxies for his agenda. So we have to take Khamenei's word seriously. That's why we are seeing that not only they are involved in Yemen, in Syria, in Gaza, in Iraq. They have so many militant groups and proxies, but they're also pushing further, going into Iraq, going to Jordan, through the Syrian border, opening a new front against Israel. So the only thing that we are seeing is a bigger problem from the Iranian regime, bigger issue from the Iranian regime. And our policies over the past 15 years didn't work. That's why the Iranian regime is only advancing in the Middle East. They never had a loss. They are now controlling Yemen. They are now controlling Iraq. They are controlling Syria, Lebanon, and many other places. But now they are facing a real fighter named Israel, And we may see, and I'm hopeful that we will see the first Iranian regime lost in the region, and that's the elimination of Hamas. A total and complete regime change in Gaza. It would be our first win against the Iranian regime. They have been able to hold on to their grip on power in so many other parts of the world. So I'm very hopeful that Israel will be able to get our first win against the regime. And my suggestion for the state of Israel is that just look at these proxy groups' manifest. They are dedicated in eliminating the state of Israel. You cannot coexist with group. Don't wait until they knock on your door. You have to go against them preemptively. So to answer your, the second part of your question about what would a free Iran, be posing benefits for United States, I think in addition to the fact that all these issues that I just mentioned will be gone, and I don't even want to mention the fact that Iran will be an energy hub in the region and in the world. Iran has one of the biggest gas reserves in the world, and before the revolution, our oil production was 6.5 million, much more than what Iraq is producing now. So Europe can be totally independent from Russia, and Iran will have much to offer to the region. And also, we have seen the rise of isolationism in the United States, and we are hearing from both parties that we want our troops back home. Guess what? In 1970s, United States was not in Bahrain, in Qatar, in Kuwait. And so we can get back to the golden era of US-Iran relationship, which was during President Nixon and our late Shah, and the policy of two pillars. Iran will be the guarantor of peace and stability in the region. That's, I think, what can a free Iran can offer to the world.
Thank you, Navid. There's some great points. Our next question is going to be for Ellie. The regime's human rights abuses have drawn international condemnation. How would regime change improve the human rights situation in Iran, and how do U.S. interests align with the people of Iran?
First of all, I just want to say good morning to everybody, and thank you to Dr. Ganji, to Kamran Khansarinia and Nufti for inviting me and for hosting these fabulous 2 days. I think we've had some really important conversations. I want to answer your question, Tymahz, by kind of saying how much I agree, Navid, with your indignation at perhaps the lack of action as we see the Islamic Republic of Iran's regime increase aggression on a daily basis. And so the question is, would human rights be improved under free Iran under regime change? And I think that goes without saying. We know that the Islamic Republic is one of the world's worst human rights abusers. All of the human rights organizations have documented this ad nauseum. And so the question, though, that I'd like to focus on is the U.S. interests. And does the U.S. interests align with the Iranian people's interests? And I would argue that is 100% the case. The Iranian people are daily oppressed and under threat from this regime. And we are also, as the United States, dealing with a significant threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran. And so to just kind of lay that out a little bit, if you zoom out and you look at the global stage right now, and I've described a lot of this in a chapter that I just recently published for the America First Policy Institute. And in the chapter I describe what is happening on the global stage, which is that we are seeing this strengthening alliance between China, Russia, and Iran. And this is happening as China hopes to really remove the United States as a global superpower and really compete with the US, and if not replace the US, and create this multipolar world as they see it, with Russia as a partner in this. And so Iran is playing a significant role in trying to create this new multipolar world that, that they are looking to create. And so the US is being directly threatened by this axis of evil. And so this is what's happening. So they are conducting everything from joint military exercises together. They are working together hand in glove to evade sanctions together. And they're creating supply chains with each other. We are hearing, of course, about how Iran is supplying Russia right now with UAVs, drones, missiles, and in return we are hearing worrying reports that perhaps Russia might be helping Iran with its nuclear program and giving Iran capabilities that it doesn't currently have. So this is a serious threat and a new, unique challenge to the United States that we have not faced yet in our history. Now, if we had only this access to deal with, it would be enough for the United States to understand the seriousness of the Iranian regime's threat to the US. But it's not only that, it's also the direct threat. Let's remember that this regime came from the original sin of taking the US embassy personnel hostage. That is how this regime came to be in its earliest days. They have murdered countless American citizens and military personnel. Only since October 7th, they have attacked US assets over 75 times. And the list goes on. Today we know that the Iran-backed Houthis are causing unprecedented disruption in the commercial and military naval freedom of movement. The United States is considered the international police officer of the seas. And so all of this is going on. This is on a daily basis. And then we heard what Navid was describing just now, which is, again, historically unprecedented. Our intelligence agencies are saying that the Islamic Republic of Iran is actively trying to assassinate former President Trump, as he's also running for president of the United States again, on American soil. The level of nerve that it takes for the Islamic Republic to be actively trying to assassinate a former US president. They are also interfering with our elections right now, again, unprecedented, to the extent that they have hacked the Trump campaign and tried to give that information over to the Harris campaign. So when you look at this picture, it is abundantly clear that the Islamic Republic of Iran is posing an unprecedented threat to the United States. And the question just becomes, how do we as a country respond to this threat? We've seen from the Democrat Party, Jimmy Carter, who helped usher in the Islamic Republic regime, and from Barack Obama to Joe Biden, where there's been a policy of appeasement. And I think we all understand that this appeasement policy does not work. So clearly under President Trump, we had the maximum pressure campaign, and that was spoken about a bit yesterday. We saw the elimination of Qasem Soleimani. This was clearly a new front in US policy in how to deal with the threat of the Islamic Republic. And I have no doubt that should we see President Trump back in office in January, we are going to see a new policy towards Iran that will be radically different from what we are unfortunately experiencing right now.
Thank you, Ellie. Our next question is going to be an open question, so whoever wants to answer it, if you guys all want to give an answer. Iran's influence in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen has contributed to regional instability. How could a change in Iran's government alter the balance of power in the Middle East, and what are the potential benefits for regional allies?
Michael, you want to, did you
No,
want
don't worry, I'm going to chime in, but this is for you or Walid, I think.
I'll follow up. No, go ahead.
So you wanted to speak about the proxies.
Correct, yeah.
So, I mean, you know, the proxies are, what I have found frustrating is the lack of understanding of the proxies as proxies, right? So when the international community looks at Hamas and perceives Hamas as a terror group in Gaza, and the Houthis as a terror group in Yemen that's, you know, so let's say Hamas is threatening the Israelis, and the Houthis are threatening the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, and the Bahrainis, and then they look at Hezbollah as a separate, you know, terror entity, and that's also perhaps threatening Israel, and so on. They go through the proxies and look at them as individual problems and treat them as individual problems. Well, I would argue that these, you know, it's a failed strategy. It's a failed strategy, and it's really it's overdue for the international community, including the United States, including the Israelis, to understand that this is going to be an endless cycle of violence, and you can continue to constantly try to deal with the symptom, which are the proxies, or you can just go to the head of the octopus, as a lot of people are calling it, and go to where the problem emanates from, and that is the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Let me add a couple points.
I think Michael wanted to go, and then we'll come to you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Actually, I was going to pay you a compliment, Walid, on this, but in addressing this question, first of all, of course, thank you to Nufti, thank you to Dr. Ganji. I don't want to be the only person on the panel, be ta'aruf. So with that, what I would say, if we want to look at this in the context of Walid's opening comments, I think that the United States has two problems as we approach this region that allows us to confuse ourselves about our own values. The first problem is that we conceive of history in snippets of maybe 2 or 4 years. We don't have a broad sense, and therefore, just like during the Arab Spring, which caught many people by surprise, suddenly academics were commissioned to write books, and they wrote books about the Arab Spring saying, we always saw it coming, how come you didn't see it coming? It was the natural apex of all the political evolution. The same thing happened in 1979 when you had books commissioned, and we all know the authors who wrote these, Nikki Keddie, Irvan Abrahamian, and so forth, whose main theses were this Islamic Republic was the natural political evolution. It was the apex of that political evolution. They don't understand that the Islamic Revolution, the Islamic Republic, is an anomaly, not the norm, and that it's overdue for a hard landing, if I may use the regime's own parlance. Now, the point of this when it comes to the proxies is that, and this goes to the second issue, the United States doesn't understand ideology. It can be very comforting to look at terrorism through the lens of grievance, because if the problem that we have with Hezbollah, with Hamas, with the Houthis is grievance, then you can come up with some magic diplomatic formula to make it go away. The problem is, it's not grievance related. It is ideology, pure and simple. Then the question comes, lack of imagination. How often have we heard, Hezbollah is a fact of life. Hamas is a fact of life. There's no way to get rid of them. Can you defeat an ideology? Well, if you think in greater sense of history than 2 years, how worried are we today about the Baader-Meinhof gang in Germany? Or if territory is the issue, thank God that back in the 1970s, we didn't say we just have to live with the Khmer Rouge. The fact of the matter is you can uproot these ideologies, and I suspect, in answer to your specific question, that when the Islamic Republic falls, that we are going to see these other proxies, which are the tentacles of the octopus, have a very hard landing indeed, because their ideology is now completely delegitimized in the eyes of the people. And I'm sure Walid has seen this. I have my friends in Lebanon and so forth. I spend a lot of time in Dakhliya and in southern Lebanon, and people are openly mocking Hezbollah today. And this is just going to come, it's a phenomenon which is going to steamroll it. If, and I defer to Ellie in this, and to Navid, if the United States doesn't snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, we shouldn't get in the way of the Iranian people and in people more broadly throughout the region, putting an end to this odious, odious regime.
since we started the description now, I can see the US now under this administration and the Obama administration as a huge turtle nobody can defeat directly. And the regime as a hyena is much faster. What we lack now is a lack of speed, but we don't have the speed because we don't have the strategy. We don't have the strategy because the policy is going into another direction. This administration, now it's not fault only the administration, the intelligentsia behind this administration, do not look at what they call the Iranian government, which in fact is the Islamic regime, as a foe, as an enemy, even when their agencies are telling them they are trying to kill a former president. Even if their agencies, and correct me, Michael, because you worked on Iraq, tells us that more than 700 US military have been killed in Iraq by militias taking orders from the Khomeinist regime. We are at a very bad situation. And I said earlier, it's going to take the next administration a long time before cleaning up not just the bureaucracies from the bad apples, but cleaning up the way we think about the region and getting to academia and then getting to media, give them the actual right analysis. And to answer this question, Michael is right. Let me say what he was right about. The societies, civil societies in the Middle East are ripe and ready. Who's going to convince me that the Iranian people is not ready for a massive change? That's why the demands of the Iranian people are massive support, maximum support. The problem is those who are blocking that change are us. You ask anybody in the Middle East, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, what is happening? Why are we not being successful? And the answer is not only the United States is neutral. If it was neutral, in some places, local societies can win if they were not neutral. But to come in June of 2009, have the President of the United States assuring and reassuring the regime in public that we are not going to meddle in this. This is not, because we're going to be seen as meddling in Iranian affairs. What does that mean in regional politics? Go ahead, take them. I'm not going to intervene. The first policy you have when you have a struggle between a society, unarmed society, and an oppressive regime like the Khomeinis, it's like what Reagan, when Reagan says, Mr. Gorbachev, bring down that wall, destroy the wall. Unfortunately, it's going to take, and it's the first time I say it in terms of analyzing the region, it's going to take an election here. It's going to take a change beyond the election to rectify, to change our perception of the Middle East. And I am confident, like most of us on this panel, that the Middle East today, the peoples, including, and I would start with the Iranian people, but every other colonies and vassal state to that regime, already it's going to look like somehow like when the Soviet Union collapsed. Every single domino collapsed. So helping the Iranian people to free themselves from this regime is going to help the entire region and therefore the world. So I'm with you on the necessity of a change, massive change.
I couldn't agree more with you. One of the issues that we are facing right now is that the presidents or some elements in the US government are not even interested in solving the Iranian regime's threats. I think the administration approach is like, get Iran off of my agenda. I don't want to deal with Iran. So we are facing within a status quo. What is the status quo? The United States is telling the Iranian regime, do not enrich uranium any further. We are not going to enforce sanctions. That's why we are seeing unprecedented amount of oil sale by the Iranian regime. And so who is benefiting from that status quo? The Iranian regime itself, because they are making billions of dollars and they're using that money to support their proxies. Now we are seeing that one of their proxies, Houthis in Yemen, who used to live in the back of the mountains in north of Yemen, they have the kind of ballistic missiles that even many Arab countries don't have. Hezbollah has the kind of arsenal that many Arab countries don't have. So it's an issue. So if you ask me how we can solve these issues altogether, first of all, I'm not a military expert, so I can't say or advocate for a military intervention against the regime. I can talk about the kind of things that I know about, and that's empowering the Iranian people against the Islamic Republic regime in Iran. Do Iranian people have the kind of commitment that the West needs to see first? Yes, over the past 6 years, actually since 2017, more than 3,000 Iranians have lost their lives. So no one can say that, oh, the idea of regime change or collapsing, helping to bring down the Iranian regime is just a diaspora thing. They have been overseas for 45 years, they're out of touch with the Iranian people. No, that's not the case. People on the ground are fighting and they are demanding help from the Western countries. So what should be the strategy in order to bring down the regime and help the Iranian people? I suggest or advise Western countries and Israel just to copy-paste what the Iranian regime is doing in respect to its proxies. They are providing funding, they are providing intelligence supports, military supports. Nothing is off the table for them. If the Western countries, Israel, show the same kind of commitment and dedication that the Iranian regime is showing to its proxies, to the Iranian people, we are going to see change in Iran. I was reading a report, I think it was by FDD in 2020, that the Iranian regime is spending around $7 billion to $15 billion per year supporting its groups, supporting its proxies in the region. Regime change and empowering Iranian people is expensive. Who's going to pay for all that? So as Iran, Russia, China, they are collaborating with one another, the new axis of evil, the Western countries, democracies, Israel, and Arab nations should also unite against their common enemy, the Iranian regime, and help and support Iranian opposition. We are talking about maximum support, providing maximum support to Iran, but that's expensive. Providing internet to Iranians is going to cost money. Providing a strike fund for the Iranian workers is going to strike money. And believe me, we cannot raise that kind of fund from the diaspora overseas. We need support, funding, and the same level of commitment that Iranian regime's proxies have from the Iranian regime. If we don't show the same level of commitment, if we don't match the level of funding that the regime provides, actually it has to be 3 times more. Do you know why? Because Arab countries, United States, Western countries are way richer than Iranian regime. I don't see that level of commitment from those countries. Israel just waited until it's encircled by the Iranian regime. I think now, after what happened in October 7, they're understanding that regime change and empowering the Iranian people is the option. But we need international support. Regime change is not like pushing a button or participating in conferences or talking about it. It has to get into implementation phase, and that has to start from empowering Iranian people and its rightful opposition. We need to have funding and resources. I guarantee you, many Iranian groups are so broke that they can't even rent such a place for their events. How can you fight off the Iranian regime that it's a security state and all its resources are spent in protecting and preserving its agenda? It's impossible. Hezbollah is receiving $1 billion per year. And one of our best organizations here, such as Nofti, is much smaller. So that has to be supported by Iranian people, organizations like Nofti, by Iranian diaspora, and also our allies. Our community is very fractured. They are traumatized after 45 years. So we need kind of support. But Nofti is different from the opposition groups. That has to come from other countries, actually. I don't see that level of commitment.
If I can jump in on that. You know, countering the Iranian threat is far more expensive than investing in the Iranian opposition. And you know, when we talk about aligning America's values with the values and interests of the Iranian people, so we've seen over and over again that the Iranian people have taken bullets to the head because they are seeking freedom from this regime. And you know, I don't even like to use the language they, because I myself was born in Iran to a very proud Jewish family, and we trace our ancestry back to ancient Persia over 2,000 years, you know, predating the Islamic conquest of Persia. And so I don't even like to use the language they, it's really we, right? We, the Iranian people, whether it's those who are still in Iran, have taken bullets to the head in their quest for freedom. And those of us who have been forced out of our ancient homes in the diaspora are daily fighting for the freedom of our brothers and sisters still there and for our own homeland. And so in terms of the United States and the US values, well, the United States is premised on Judeo-Christian values. It's the notion that the human being is created in the image of God, that every human life has worth and value, and that the Iranian people deserve the human rights that we enjoy here in the West. Every year, the US State Department issues the human rights reports, and they are cataloging the abuses that this regime is committing against its own people. So we're confident, and we know that the interests of this country aligns with the interests of the people of Iran. And again, Navid, it costs so much less for us to invest in the Iranian people than to try to counter the threat of the Islamic Republic. In my AFPI chapter, I outline, and we've heard a lot of discussion here in this conference, about a new American policy that would be a continuation of the Trump policy, which is maximum pressure, but adding to that, maximum pressure on the Islamic Republic regime, but adding to it maximum support for the Iranian people. And so what that would look like, well, it would be more engagement of opposition groups. It would be helping to build civil society. And I think perhaps most importantly, it would be beginning to think about strategic planning for a day after the fall of the Islamic Republic. Because what you and I in this room know is that this regime is an anomaly. They do not represent the proud, thousands-year-old ancient Persian history. They are a 45-year anomaly. They are going to be in the ash heap of autocracies, and like the Nazis before them, we're going to see them in the ash heap of history. And truly like the Nazis before them, what we are going to see following this fall of this regime will be a de-radicalization program. And just as we defeated the Nazis, Michael, to your point about do you defeat an ideology? Yes, we defeated the Nazi ideology, and we will be able to defeat the Islamic Republic of Iran's ideology, which has poisoned the entire Middle East, North Africa. And so, you know, I am confident that with the right people in the White House in the United States, we will see unprecedented support for the Iranian people, because now we are suddenly in an unprecedented time.
I'm gonna,
Sorry.
Can I jump?
I'm gonna jump in very quickly. Of course, I agree with what Ellie said, but I also want to pick up on Walid's question about the hundreds of Americans who were killed in Iraq because of Iran. One of the broader patterns which we need to recognize, and this goes to the heart of America's values, is that when the United States across administrations approaches Iran, too often we approach it with a polite, almost racist disdain. in that we're not holding the Iranians to the same standards. I'm talking about the Iranians in the Islamic Republic that we hold the rest of the world to. We need to recognize that the Iranians, the Islamic Republic, has agency. They are behind their own decisions and have to be held accountable for them. A few years ago, and this goes into Walid's question, hundreds of Americans were killed, but how often have we heard, can we really pin this on the Islamic Republic? It could have been rogue actors. A few years ago for the National Counterterrorism Center, I went through the list of rogue actions that American diplomats, European diplomats dismissed. We could go back to the Qassemloo affair on July 13th, 1989. We just passed the anniversary of the Mykonos Cafe assassinations. You had the Buenos Aires bombings in 1992 and the Jewish Cultural Center in 1994. We could go all the way up to Iraq with the improvised explosive devices. When you look at each of those cases, one thing is, there's two items in common. The first is the actual terrorism was dismissed as a rogue action. The second item is the perpetrator was promoted after the fact. And so that is proof itself that the Iranians are simply taking advantage of our naivete. They're treating us like a country of useful idiots, as they have their own very specific, very precise strategy. We need to recognize that the Islamic Republic is not passive. They're very proactive. And it's not them who are not in control of their own actions. It is us who are being taken for fools. So the first thing we need to do is actually recognize when we look at our adversary, that our adversary is working directly and with precision to defeat us. And we need to conceptualize that so that we, as Ellie has said, as Navid has said, as Walid have said, we need a strategy to defeat the Islamic Republic. And look, this isn't the topic of the panel, but I would argue that what needs to be first and foremost on the agenda of the next administration isn't simply the maximum pressure, which is wise and necessary. It's figuring out how to fracture the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Because until we reach that step, it's simply wishful thinking to believe that our enemies aren't going to take action against us.
Thank you. Michael, I mean, the three of you have covered most of my answers, but let's do some work of imagination. Ellie spoke about the D-Day, the day after, the D-Day and the day after. Let me try a projection of events that should happen for our policy to change, symbolically strong changes of perception. Number one, an American president should address the Iranian people with a speech on TV, translated in the languages, Farsi and others in Iran. People inside Iran needs to see an American president addressing them to reverse a speech that was delivered by another American president in Cairo, where he declared an alliance with the jihadists. That has to change completely. Second, the people inside Iran should see that the next White House will open the Oval Office to a delegation of leadership of the opposition. Inside Iran needs to see that their voice is outside, that all the problems of ignoring the opposition, not speaking with the opposition, this has to be resolved. I mean, imagine families of hostages, American hostages in Iran, or Iranian, let's say, activists who are in prison. They need to hear a voice, and that should be the voice of the next President of the United States. Then, obviously, the good stuff. The good stuff is, before dropping any dollar anywhere, stop sending billions of dollars to the regime. That's the minimum for a change of policy. And I would agree that was a policy of the Bush administration to allocate, was it about $50 million? 70 million. To double and triple that amount and send it to the opposition, starting by the diaspora. We, as friends of Iran, a free Iran, will pressure the next administration. They won't need pressure because that's what they envisage to do, but we need to talk to Congress that we need to support them. I mean, you have paid trillions of dollars in Afghanistan, billions and billions on various armies. We're talking to you about a civil society in the diaspora that itself is supporting the people of Iran. We as Americans, and you as Iranian Americans, should be telling our federal government that we need to support this opposition. And last point, the real actual menace that is putting their weight on the administration, on Congress, on everything, are economic interests in this country, and in France, and in Germany, etc. That is something that we don't discuss much. And those economic interests were promised by the Iran deal, and of course by the smart ayatollahs behind them. Oh, if you protect us, if you stop any action against us, we are going to behave well. We don't like Al-Qaeda. They start selling us, mercantile stuff. We need to talk to these financial interests. You need, as communities, Congress needs, and hopefully if there is another administration in that line, call on these companies. Yes, we know you have those contracts since the Obama time, like, I don't want to name them now, but I will name them later. 5, 6 gigantic companies that are placing their weight on the Oval Office, because the Oval Office may not know anything about what's going on. They just look at the National Security Advisor, advice and then go with it. Those companies need to understand not only what you're doing is immoral, not only what you're doing, it is counterproductive. I mean, you are so happy with the $150 billion, and the return is $15 billion. Every broker knows that. When you send $150 billion to someone, to a party, you're going to get 10%. So all that lobbying and all that catastrophic pressure on all decision makers is the weight of $15 billion. So what we need to tell them is that $150 billion, if you work with the Iranian economy yesterday, what did we hear on this panel? It's $5 to $7 trillion. Even as business people, you're making very wrong business decisions. So let go of your pressure. Let go of the Iran deal. Support the Iranian opposition. Free Iran and let the world thrive in peace. That would be my recommendation for the next administration. Thank you.
And then I think we only have time for one more question. It's going to be open-ended, though, so you can all take a jab at it. Lessons from other regime change efforts, such as in Iraq and Libya, highlight the challenges and risks involved. How can the U.S. ensure that a strategy for regime change in Iran doesn't end up the same way?
I have a lot of friends in the former Trump administration who were, involved or were on the ground in Iraq. And I think that part of the challenge we have in the United States in imagining a new and stronger policy towards Iran is the trauma, if I may use that word, of the American experience and what happened in Iraq. So that's the bad news, but then there's the good news. The good news is that we went through that. I think there were lessons learned. There are a lot of really smart people like Joel Rayburn and others who can catalog how do we avoid the pitfalls and mistakes. But I'm also gonna say something that may be slightly controversial, which is that in order for us to get to a free Iran and a democratic and secular Iran, which I would imagine is what the Iranian people want, we have to believe, though, that we will need at some point a caretaker government, and we're going to need trusted individuals to be responsible and to be partners to the United States. And there was one person who spoke here yesterday who both the US government knows, the international community knows, but most importantly, the people of Iran know. And that is the Iranian crown prince. And so, sure. So I think one of the lessons to be learned from Iraq, from Afghanistan, is that we need a trusted caretaker government that will help us get through to a transition. And then after a transition, certainly there should be democratic elections in Iran, and let the Iranian people decide their fate from there.
Yeah. To answer your question, Tymahz, United States can only blame itself and its decision-making for what happened in Iraq. Why is that? They spent billions of dollars in Iraq, liberated the country, and then they turned handed the country to the Islamic Republic regime in Iran. They should have not done that. And their idea was that, oh, we're going to liberate the country, and then we're going to have an election. But if you play by the rules, your enemies do not play by the rules. We have election in Iraq, but with the presence of so many Iranian proxies and militant groups and the economic leverage that they have against the Iraqi societies, those elections are not free. So United States should have leverage its troops on the ground against groups that do not play by the rules and not involve them in the process. They should have oppressed them. And the US policy should be having a reliable ally on those countries rather than having an open-ended election that your enemies do not play by the rules. And in 2011, United States government should not have pulled out troops from Iraq. They could have used it as leverage against Qasem Soleimani and his thugs and Saad's movement. They should have oppressed them. But the issue is that they spent the money and then they lost their interest. They left the country. It created a vacuum, and the Iranian regime took over. But for this time around, for Iran, we don't need troops on the ground. We need a reliable ally who has a proven track record and is seeking friendship with the state of Israel, with the United States and other countries.
I'm going to jump in with a different example, and we can debate Iraq all day, but I spent much of January, some of you know, in Cuba. And when it comes to Cuba, there is a popular misconception, especially among the Cubans, that Barack Obama had lifted sanctions, then Donald Trump had reimposed sanctions. There was frustration that Joe Biden hadn't lifted some of the restrictions on cigars and rum. But the fact of the matter is that Barack Obama didn't lift sanctions on Cuba. He massaged things around the edge in interpretations, but the reason he didn't lift sanctions is because most of the sanctions in Cuba were legislated, and it would take an act of Congress to undo them. So when it comes to the Iranian case, to what the regime fears most are those movements which transcend ethnicity, transcend social class, and transcend region. And so this is why they crack down so much on the woman life freedom movement, or on labor unions, or on environmental protesters. So the question then becomes, what can we legislate in a way that no president can undo, that says that the United States is committed to independent trade unions in Iran, and we will fund them in this regard? What can we do to say that the United States stands for clean, green, environmental policies everywhere in the world, including Iran, and this is what we're going to do to support the environmental movement or the women life freedom movement and their allies? That can't simply be, I mean, we're in a period of ping pong, whiplash diplomacy among administrations. We can wish it away, but that's the fact of life. So therefore, if we want to learn the lesson, and this is a lesson which is now successful in Cuba, because freedom isn't going to be denied to the people by rewarding the military regime there. What we need to do is legislate, legislate, legislate in a way that takes away the options for whoever is in the White House to implement their worst instincts.
But we have enough legislations against the Iranian regime. Sanctions are in place. The issue is that they're not being implemented.
No, the difference is that there's a difference between sanctions and sanctions without waivers. There's a difference between how you do the sanctions and something like the Helms-Burton law, which was deliberately passed to deny any future administration the power to unravel those sanctions with an executive order as opposed to an act of Congress.
You know, one thing that perhaps the next Senate can do is that we're going to put every single nominees on hold until you implement oil sanctions against the Iranian regime. We are going to do obstruction until you take action.
Can I follow up on this point and then give an example from 2019, the end of the Trump administration? Number one, there are many politicians in this city who are divided on what to do with Iran and with its regime. Of course, those who support the Iran regime, the Iran deal, they say, don't do anything, don't engage, don't unnerve the Ayatollahs, and we have all these problems around the region. On the other side, there are also some problematic positions. For example, the one I hear from good friends in the Senate, we're going to go and bomb the infrastructure of Iran. Maybe the regime will think twice. Why do we want to bomb the infrastructure of Iran? We have the Pasdaran, we have the Sepa Pasdaran, we have all the guards that guards the regime. If there are demonstrations, if there are masses, if there are reactions against the masses, what you do is a speech from the White House and you degrade the capacity of these militias. These militias already are engaged against Israel, already are engaged against our forces in Iraq and Syria. But let me give you the example of what could have been a different time. 2019, I was working unofficially with Brian Hook, Ambassador Brian Hook from the State Department, and he had a great team. They created an international coalition of countries, international coalition, and guess where was the actual headquarters of that coalition? In Warsaw. I don't know if anybody was there. It was an international coalition to isolate the regime, to apply all the program that I have been speaking about. That was a Trump policy. And actually, it was about to start. The lists were about to contact, the list of opposition leaders, including the national leaders, to bring them to the White House. But then what happened? The revolution in Iran, in Lebanon, in Iraq in 2019, they had to adapt the policy. And then COVID hit. And then the rest is history as you know it, because that administration ceased from existing. So there were examples where policies like this, strategic policies, can come back and be better for the next 4 years, maybe for the next 8 years. So I have great hope that if we do a change in general in our policy. I even went on TV and said, even with the last 40 days of the Biden administration, before any other administration comes, they have some sort of epiphany and they change their policy, I'll support them. But it's not going to happen, obviously. We need another administration. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, but we do have time for one audience question for Dr. Rubin. The question says, groups like the MEK spend millions of dollars to buy off politicians. What can groups like Nufti do to compete and stay ahead with vastly less financial resources?
Look, we're out of time, and I see lunch is being served, so let me just say this, that reputational damage to politicians can matter just as much as donations. And I see this on the broad level when it comes to international businesses that are considering doing business with the regime in Iran. And the response isn't to try to beat the Mujahideen al-Khalq at their own corrupt game. It's to basically have moral clarity and ensure that the politicians understand that if they take any of this blood money, that they are going to be held accountable and they are going to be publicly embarrassed.
Thank you so much, guys. I'm sure we could continue this conversation for another several hours, but unfortunately we are out of time. Thank you.